What's going on, guys? This is the Snodgrass podcast. Thank you guys for joining me today. Hey, before I introduce the guest on today's podcast episode, go over to our YouTube channel, Iron Deep. You guys are not going to want to miss some of the videos that we're coming out with. I just put out a video a couple of weeks ago about sacrificing your family for your career. Oh man, there was a quote in a book that I read that talked about how can a man have an amazing career, leave his family in ruins, but still be considered great. I don't think that's true. I don't think you do either. So make sure you go over, check that out on our Iron Deep channel, and go over to irondeep.com. And if you're interested in our Men's Awakening that is coming up super fast, September the 25th to the 28th, make sure you register for that. We got like 2 spots left, but we do have a spot for you if you're interested, and you can apply on our irondeep.com. I want to introduce you to Miranda Carls. She is an author, a speaker, a multi-certified corporate leadership coach. She's written a new book called The Word at Work, 10 Biblical Principles for Christian Professionals. Miranda, she's got a heart for helping Christian professionals show up whole as high performers and leaders at work while remaining firmly rooted in the truth of the gospel. Guys, we need this. We need it so bad. We don't need another pastor at the pulpit as much as we need real men and women in the marketplace falling in love with Christ, sharing the gospel, and modeling it in the workplace and in their own environments. This is what Miranda is going to talk about today. I'm going to introduce you now to Miranda. What's going on? This is the Snodgrass podcast, and I am with Miranda Carls out of St. Louis, Missouri. What's going on, Miranda?
Hey, Brett. Not a lot. Good to be chatting with you today.
Yes, you too. And I actually was just on Miranda's podcast. Not sure when that's going to be out, but super excited because you have your own podcast, The Word at Work, and
That's right.
that's your book, The Word at Work: 10 Biblical Principles of the Christian Professionals. We're excited to talk about that today.
Yeah. Thank you for blocking out so much of your afternoon to hang out with me.
Yes, no, it's fabulous. We kind of have some similar vibes. You got
Mhm.
3 kids, I got 4, Midwest. So
Yes.
sounds good. Well, I always like to start off with this question, Miranda, and that is this. This is the deep one. So here it
hmm
goes. Who is Miranda Carls?
Yeah. So I'll start first and foremost. I'm a child of God. I'm a Christ follower. So I try to have that as foundational to who I am, and hopefully that comes through in everything. And then some of the fun personal stuff. I'm also a wife. My handsome husband Dustin and I have been married for 12 years, and we have 3 beautiful little boys. Ages, say Riker is 10 now, Brevin is 7, and Garen is 5. So he's been drug into kindergarten, kicking and screaming over the past few days.
Oh no.
Yeah. And so they're fun, and I stay pretty busy with all my guys at home. I'm the only girl
What's
in the house aside from the
yeah.
dog. We have a Maltipoo Piper. So and then on the work front, I my background is in corporate learning and development. I have been in that people development field for my full career. I started out actually working for a nonprofit, and I stayed in that space for a little while before joining a friend that was starting up a learning and development company. So I joined from pretty close to the ground level on that. Stayed there for almost a decade, helping with that company, and then was leading the learning and the learning design function when I left that company a couple years ago to start what I'm doing now. I have my own coaching practice that I actually started while I was working at that company. So I provide leadership and professional development coaching largely to people that work in corporate settings, but also a few folks that are entrepreneurs or work in other settings as well. And let's see, I now my fun stuff that I've started over the last year is really taking some of that corporate background and marrying it with my faith and providing resources specifically for Christians that work in secular work settings.
Wow. That's quite the resume. You've done a lot, and you've always worked with people. right?
Yeah.
So, like, I
Yep.
always know that everybody says that every business is a people business, but a lot of times, like my business has been real estate. It's always been I have people that work for me, and a lot of times
Mhm.
you could say it's people, but a lot of transactions here and there.
Yeah.
But you've really worked with people. Would you say like what is that like? I mean, aren't people the miracles number one, but sometimes it can be, yeah, kind of a messy business. Is that
Yeah.
what you think?
Yeah. I think when you're primarily working with people, it's never a dull moment, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no formula for
Right.
anything with people. Like we can read all of these books that have these formulas and these plug
What
and play.
about
Like
the
here's
Yeah, what about the 5 the tips to the happiest life? I don't know. There's so many books about
yeah,
whatever.
we try to make and some of those books, I'll say I've got books on my shelf behind me that are probably some of those formulas for working with people, and they're great. But at the end of the day, like every individual that God made is different and is going to
Yeah.
process situations differently, is going to show up differently, communicate differently. And that's actually something I love about what I do. I love getting curious about people and what makes them tick. I love first sessions with new clients where I really just get to learn who they
Mm,
are and what they're all about and what makes them different.
yeah.
So that's really fun for me. And I think as a kid, I was always one who loved meeting new people. My mom would say we'd be on family vacations and she'd look over and I was chatting with an old man on a bench or something. So I think that's what got me into working with people. We have something in common, actually, Brett. You shared when we were talking on my podcast that you went to school to be a teacher and then
Yeah.
taught for a hot minute, right? And then
Yeah.
transitioned into business. I
Yeah.
also my undergrad was in education, and then it was through student teaching. I had a wonderful student teaching experience, but ended up going into the business world as
Wow.
well. So
That's
also a
cool.
very
Did you
people driven
teach
field.
did you teach, was it elementary, middle school, high school?
High school.
High
Yep.
school, okay. So
Yep.
what field, what subject?
What subject? Agriculture, actually.
Agriculture,
Yeah.
interesting. I
Yeah.
would have pictured you as, I don't know, an English teacher for some
Yeah.
reason, but agriculture, I wouldn't have said that.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
I was a math teacher,
Mm.
yeah, math is very, again, transactional, pretty black and white. I like to tell stories, do the podcast, tell a lot of stories, stuff like
Yeah.
that. But math's like, I don't know, it's harder to tell stories about the problems. Um, anyways, that's cool. Yeah, we both had that experience, and that's awesome. So, quick question before we really just talk about your book. You got this book, The Word at Work: 10 Biblical Principles for Christian Professionals, which I really want to dive into that. But okay, people, you're in the people business, developing people. What do you think about personality tests? That's a question I was very
Mm.
interested in. Do you like personality tests? Do you think that is really, really put someone in that, in that some people call it a box or
Yeah.
whatever. And if you do like personality tests, which is one that you love?
Yeah. I'm not going to give you a straight answer on this one because I
Okay.
think it really does depend. I'm definitely one to shy away from like putting things in little boxes when we're talking about people.
Yeah.
So I, as a coach, as a leadership coach, I've administered a lot of personality type tests. I'm certified to do like emotional intelligence assessments on folks. So I use a lot of those. I'll tell you the same thing I tell my clients. Like it's just an assessment. It's giving you numbers and data based on what you put into it at that moment that you were sitting down and taking it,
Hmm.
which can be impacted by your mood that day. If you're
For
hungry,
sure.
what context are you thinking of the scenario in when you're responding to the question? And they're never going to be perfect. I like to use them as a conversation starter to start digging into, oh, it says this. Like, how do you feel about that response? Does that sound like you? Does that not feel like you? Okay, well, let's look at some situations. And then we can really dig into the real stuff there.
Yeah.
There is a fun one I like that's free if anyone listening wants to take
Yeah. Give it.
advantage of it. It's called the Saboteur Assessment.
Interesting. Never heard of
It's
that one.
yeah, it's a positive intelligence one, and it talks about how we talk to ourselves,
Hmm.
and we can also look at this through I look at it through a Christian perspective on my own as well, but it digs into we all have these messages that we tell ourselves throughout the day, and that impacts how we interact with other
For
people,
sure.
how we show up in situations. So, an example, one of them is avoider. So, someone who has a really loud avoider saboteur, that might sound like, don't have that hard conversation. It's not going to go
Mhm.
well.
Yes.
Don't take that risk. Don't do that. You're not quite ready. Something might go
Right.
wrong. One is pleaser. So that's the people pleaser.
Mhm.
Don't do that. That won't make them happy. So you get the idea. And there's
Yeah.
10 different saboteurs that they unpack. So that's a
Interesting.
fun one.
Yeah.
But again, with all of them, I think we can overlean on them, or we start to say, what's your, tell me
Yes.
your, tell me your Myers-Briggs type, and then I'm going to make all
Right.
these judgments about you. So,
Right, I know.
yeah,
I know. No, that's cool. I'm just always interested. Have you ever taken the Enneagram test?
I haven't.
Okay.
I know
That's
it's
one that
super
I kinda
popular, but
yeah.
I've not, I've not gotten into that one.
Yeah. I kinda lean on that sometimes. Anyways,
Yeah.
we won't have to get into all that, but, you have to check that one out. I'll check out the Saboteur one. Alright, so The Word at Work, 10 Biblical Principles for Christian Professionals. So you wrote this book. I read the book. It's awesome, guys. If you guys wanna really check it out, it has a lot of good practical principles, a lot of great stories too. I love, just kinda reading through your stories, Miranda. And so let's just start with that. I mean, when did you get this idea? Obviously, there's a lot of you go to the Christian book section, there's a lot of Christian books, and you felt like you were called to write this particular book about bringing the word more into the secular marketplace, right? So
Mhm.
why'd you do that?
Yeah. In some ways, Brett, I think I can look at a moment that was the catalyst for that, and then in other ways, it felt like this really long thing where God was placing this on my heart. So I'll start with the moment, though the moment didn't lead to the next day I got up and started writing a book.
Right.
But the moment was actually I was in a coaching session with a client of mine. He was a leader. I had met with him for a few sessions. So this was not a first session. We had good rapport with one another. And he was always very open. Coaching sessions are confidential, so that's why I'm not sharing his name.
Mhm.
And so people are always pretty comfortable, speaking with me, especially after we've met for a couple of times. And he was getting ready to share something with me, and I could just tell by his body language and everything that he had something he wanted to share, but he wasn't quite sure how I would take it. And there was almost some like associated shame that I was just
Mm.
picking up on. So I'm sitting there like, wow, what is he about to
Right.
share, disclose with me? And then he took a deep breath and said, well, I'm a Christian, and went into, continuing to speak. And it hit me like so hard.
Mm.
I walked away from that session just thinking about it so much. Couple of things that stuck out to me. Number one, this man felt so hesitant and so
Mm.
ashamed. He wasn't delivering a sermon or anything. He was just stating, "I'm a Christian,"
Right,
and
yeah,
and then
right.
sharing how that impacted something he was working through. So that hit me hard. And then the other piece of it that was a little bit convicting was, wow, I've been meeting with him for a few times now, and he in no way picked up on the fact that that might be something that we share. So I
Wow.
did a lot of reflecting on how am I showing up, and then, not that I have to, I don't start every session, hi, I'm Miranda and I'm a Christian,
Right.
but how am I showing up? I was thinking about that. And then what is it about the secular workplace that sometimes makes Christians feel like they have to hide that that's who they are.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, a very that was the moment I would say that God used to plant this little seed in me. And then he kept working on me for a little
Mm.
while after
Wow.
that, to the point of me getting clarity around what that would look like, and then writing the book. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And why let's just maybe dig into that a little bit because you had this story
Mhm.
actually in your book kind of starts off with dropping off a student at school, like a middle
Yeah.
school, right? And the parent drops
Yeah.
them off and the kid's looking around and doesn't know exactly or doesn't want to be around the parent. Like I
Yeah.
experienced that and all of a sudden you raised up this kid and you love them, you hug them, you're with them all the time, and then they reach this season of their life where they don't want to be around you anymore and they're kind of embarrassed by you and you kind of
Yeah.
related that to us as Christians in the
Mhm.
workplace. And what was kind of like, what do you think that that is? As you're reflecting on that, why do we hide that? Like we can come up and I can say, "Oh, I'm a Cubs fan. I
Mm.
like wings. I like this show.
Yeah.
I do this for a living." but then we
Yeah.
hide that. We leave that out. Why is that, you think?
Yeah. Well, I think as people, we like to share things that connect us to other people. Because I think every Christian would tell you they'll walk into like their church life group and they're more than happy to
Right,
to so
true.
that, but it's in the sec. So we like to share things that we have in common with people. So I live in St. Louis. It's a very popular thing to say that I'm a Cardinals fan. I'm not
Mm,
really a sports fan in general, but that
right.
would be a popular
Yeah.
a popular thing to hold, or things that make us interesting in like a cool way, a way that's
Mhm,
culturally like acceptable and cool. Christianity doesn't always feel like either of those right now. And so I think on the first point of holding things in common with people, we sit there and we wonder, well, what if I'm the only Christian in my department or in this room right now?
mhm,
And if I mention that I'm going to a church event after work tonight, or when they ask me about my weekend plans and I mention, going to church, what are they going to think? So it's that sinful thing that we all
mhm.
struggle with trying to please man
Yeah.
and wanting man to be happy with us. And then that second part, things that make us different in a cool way or a socially acceptable way. I would say Christianity is becoming less and less of that even by the day.
Yeah, I
And
know.
there are associations that come with Christianity where there's this fear. And I'm sharing all of this because it's what I hear from
Yeah.
Christian professionals that I work with. There's this fear, okay, if they know I'm a Christian, are they then going to think of this? Are
Mm,
they going to think that I hate this group of people, or are
right.
they going to label me as this? Are they going to think I'm, label me as intolerant or even worse? And so there's all of that. It's fear based, I think, at the root. And so the easy thing to do for most folks, which is something I would not recommend is to hide it, to
Mm,
as I say, leave God on the curb like a middle school girl, leaving her dad there, which you've
yeah.
experienced. I'm still in my 5-year-old was clinging to me this morning as
Yeah. That's
as the
that's the
teacher
good
pried him
season.
away, which is how we should be. Yeah.
That's
cling
the good
cling to it,
season.
take our faith wholeheartedly into the workplace.
Yeah.
There's no shame associated with that. There's a guy, Reagan Rose, he's a Christian productivity expert, and he put a quote out. I had him on my podcast a while back, but something he posted on social media was, I'm going to butcher it, but I want to credit him because the base idea is from him. Like, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, and he's coming back. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to
Mm,
be embarrassed about. And I think that's really how we have to think about it and approach things as Christians. There's nothing shameful about being in Christ.
yeah. I love that. That's so good. And you're exactly right. Like the culture, I think, is starting to go the direction of kind of labeling Christians with something, and just kind of with that negative connotation. You even talk
Mhm.
about that, and I was reading through your book. You talk about kind of that. As workers, we want to develop this personal brand. So obviously, Miranda Carls, you kind of have this. You represent this sort of brand. I come off with this podcast. I represent some sort of brand, and we have this. Every company has this brand, right? And they want to develop that reputation. And it was funny because I was reading your book, and people don't want their personal brand to be labeled as Christians. And I was like, man, why is that? Because I think that
Mhm.
if you're labeled as Christians,
Yeah.
I feel like you have these biblical principles, integrity, loyalty, lover of people, all these different things. And but people don't want to be labeled as that, as their brand. You want to talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I think it sounds so odd and almost jarring to us as believers because we know, right? We know the truth. We know what Jesus represents. We know what we're called to as believers. We know what he's done for us. And so we have this pride, this internal pride, but then we're also sometimes trying to reconcile that with what we know the perceptions are um, within the larger culture. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I think there's a couple things in that. So, or why those perceptions are there. One, we sometimes don't represent them well, right? We know what we're called to as Christians, but then we don't behave in that way. So
Mm,
that can ruin the brand, so to speak, of Christianity. And then the other thing, I'll just go back to kind of culture as a whole. There are a lot of things that are celebrated in culture that we're not called to as believers. So there's that conflict. And the first principle in the book is expect the expected. This should not surprise us. Like I tell people all the time, we are not told in scripture that when you become a Christian, everyone will love you, they will celebrate what you believe, they will, be giving you high fives, and they'll be so supportive. We are told quite the opposite. We are
Mm,
told that we will be hated for his name. And so I think we have to keep that perspective too, that like this should not be surprising. This is
yeah.
this is what we're told will happen, and that shouldn't take hold of us and impact us, because that then becomes us trying to please man instead of pleasing our heavenly Father.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
funny how sometimes we can use the language, and some of it is not that offensive. Like if I said
Mhm.
I have faith, that's not super offensive, or I
Yeah,
believe
the
in
soft
God, it's not super
language.
offensive. But if you say, "Hey, I'm in love with Jesus Christ," or "I'm a follower of Jesus Christ,"
Mm,
then it's like, "Oh, that's over the line," or you know,
yeah.
you can't say that as much, like without offending people. So
Mhm.
interesting. So you have one chapter in your book that I really kind of resonated with. It was really talked about identity, and this was called
Mm,
"Don't Misplace Your," and you put a blank there. One of them was identity, and obviously, as professionals, we kind of label our identity, what we do, especially as men. So I work with a lot of men, and
mhm,
uh, so much of our identity is sucked into that, and we have this pride, like I do this, or I'm a leader of this,
mhm.
and we're just kind of label ourselves as that. And you talk about just don't misplace your identity. So can you talk to us a little bit about that as just the identity chapter?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as Christians, we're called to place our identity in Christ. And that's the foundation of who we are, far and above everything else. Even far and above being a wife and a mother, my two most cherished earthly roles
Mm,
is my identity as a daughter of the King and my identity in Christ. So as Christians, that's what we're called to, right? But that becomes hard, and that's not a norm in our, especially our Western culture, I think. I One thing I say in the book is, what's that question that we always ask kids? Like it's a small talk with children includes, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know
right.
how many times like people will ask my kids that, or it's on a questionnaire at school. I even ask my kids that, from time to
Yeah,
time, because it's fun to talk about.
I know.
But I think it does point to the fact that we place identity in what we do.
Mm,
The same thing, adults at a party, you meet another couple at church, that's likely one of the first questions you want to ask. What do you do? Because
right.
we know that that's a big part of our lives. So part of it's just the norms that we're into, and then part of it is that sheer time. We place our identity in what we give our time to.
Mm,
And so if I'm a working professional, and I don't work this many hours per week, but I do have clients that do. If I'm a working professional and I work 50, 60 hours a week, that's, if you ask me who I am, like that's the first
you're
thing that's
doing a
going to come
lot.
to
Yeah.
mind. Um, Whereas if I start to fill my time with other things, with time in the word, with prayer, with fellowship with other believers, with showing up well for my family, I'm going to, paint this different picture in my mind and in how I communicate my identity with others. And the
Mm,
other piece of that is not compartmentalizing that. So even if you are a working professional and you're spending 50, 60 hours working, if that's your role, um, are you bringing your faith into that? Is your identity in Christ woven throughout every layer of how you're spending your time? So again, not leaving God at the curb, being engaged in communication with God throughout the workday. And that can be, I'm heading into this difficult conversation. I'm going to pause and pray real quick here. All those quiet little things that we can do that no one else really notices, but it's you walking your day with God. I'm gonna pause and pray here. I'm gonna, take a deep breath and ask the Spirit for discernment here. So it's all of those little things that help us remind ourselves of our identity, and then that comes through in how we communicate that to others as well.
that's awesome. I love that. Had a phone call today with a gentleman. I think a lot of this is just kind of our Western culture too, like North
Mhm.
America. We kind of label ourselves as what we do, and he was talking about kind of some of the discipleship making movements and house church planting in some of these other countries where they're planting a lot of house churches. And he says, some of the they have just different perception times when they become a Christian follower of
Mhm.
Christ. Like if there's a taxi driver, he'll be driving a taxi, and the person that he's given a ride to, they'll say, "What do you do?" And he's like, "Well, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I
Oh,
also drive a cab sometimes,"
yeah.
or something like
That's
that. Anyways,
awesome. I
yeah,
love
that's so
that.
funny.
Yeah.
Um, that's cool. So let's talk about this chapter, fellowship. I know this is really, really on your heart. We talked about that when I was
Mhm.
on your podcast, and
Yeah.
you talk about this in the scriptures in the book of Acts. It just starts to describe the fellowship of these people going out, spreading the gospel, and how they interacted with each other. They broke bread together, ate together, prayed together, worshiped together, and just
Mhm.
had this deepness about their relationship. And you started to talk about how we interact and fellowship with other Christians. We might go have a meal together and that's it. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
So what's your just take on maybe describe maybe like your own fellowship with your circle? Like, do you have
Mhm.
people that you have that deeper connection
Yeah.
with? Does your husband? What's that
Yeah.
look like in your life?
Yeah. Well, I'll say that it's looked different at different points in my life, and I've learned a little bit from that, and I think that's part of why I'm so passionate about it. Yeah, we do see models of deeper fellowship in the Bible, in the scriptures, and sometimes we label things as fellowship that are really just like warm, fuzzy little interactions with people, like grabbing a bite to eat for lunch, sitting by them at the fellowship dinner after church on Sunday. But are you having real conversations? Are you doing life together with these other people? Do you know what's going on in their life, what they're struggling with? Do they know what's going on in your life? Do they have your permission to hold you accountable to things? So that's the goal, right? That deep fellowship. And I would say, for believers, any situation that you're facing in life, you're going to fare better if you have a believer walking alongside you. So, men listening in, that's another Christian male. Women listening in, that's another Christian woman who is, and we can lean on our spouses, our, for a lot of this as well. But we got to have those relationships with other Christians. I have not always had that, similar to what we talked about when we were talking on my podcast that you shared. We will sometimes have our work friends and then we'll have our church friends. And so
Hmm.
I've always had church friends, and have been fortunate to go to the same church for quite a while and have good friendships there. But I didn't always even know if some of my coworkers were Christians, or how big of a part of their life that was. A story I share in the book is about one of my best friends, and this is my personal biggest example of engaging in Christian fellowship, which is interesting because Ange and I have only been in person together fewer times than I can hold my hand up
Wow.
for the last 10 years.
Wow.
But I'll give a little background. So we were working for the same virtual company. We'd been working there for quite a while. I was working from home for an organization 12 years ago before it was like the thing to do. And so I was feeling very isolated. And then when I had my first child, I was, the like working from home mom gig, which felt very isolating.
Mm.
And went to a work meeting where this other woman was there, and something she said, I knew she was a Christian. She seemed to have like the same quirky sense of humor that I did, and I just had this little feeling like I think we could be friends. And so we get back, and I just pinged her. It was totally like the spirits leading. I sent her a message, and all I said was something to the extent of, "Hey, do you want to get together once a week and pray?" And I said that not knowing, like, is she gonna think I'm really weird?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
um and no, like, it ended up turning into this really beautiful workplace friendship where we would pray together once a week. and we got to know each other so well over the phone and talking to each other once a week. And then she ended up leaving the company several years before I did, but we stayed connected. And even today, like I Marco Poloed her on my way back from school, and I have one waiting on my phone from her right now. Like we are almost in constant communication with each other. And it's that type of relationship where, I can call her when I'm sobbing because something terrible just happened, or
Mm,
she can call me when she's running into a situation. And it's like we need those types of relationships in our life, and I firmly believe that as believers we need those types of relationships with other believers. That doesn't mean that we don't have non-Christian friendships. I have
mhm.
a lot of friends that are not Christians, but that doesn't mean that we can rely only on that, because we get things out of Christian fellowship with other believers that we don't get out of those relationships with people that are not sharing in that goal of walking the road with Jesus.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that story, and that took a lot of risk. I think, when you putting yourself out there takes so much risk, and a lot of times, when it comes to that risk with relationships, especially, like I said, I work with the guys. We don't risk that. It's like we play it
Mm,
safe,
yeah.
in that, and look where it's got you. I think that's amazing. One guy I was talking to, you guys have a lot of road miles together. You have a lot of experience together. Maybe not physically, but just a lot of
Mhm.
different seasons and road
Yeah.
miles, and it takes that time to really build that deepness in that relationship. Um, and I love what you said about having Christian friends, which is awesome. I so believe just sharpening each other in that, but also having the non-Christian. I think sometimes we can get in the trap of just
Mm,
writing off
yeah.
everyone who's not Christians and then just dealing in that circle. I don't think that's what Christ would have done. It's not what he did. So
Yeah.
yeah, just in his image. So awesome stuff. Miranda, we're about out of time. I want to talk about just a couple of last things here.
Mhm.
Um, the last chapter is really just called Kingdom Minded in your book. And I love that because I feel like, and this might just be me, but I feel like we get in this trap as professionals. We're in our work world and our secular workplaces, and we're like, oh, when I get out of this, when I retire, or when I sell my business or stop doing this, then I will go be the man of God and missionary or whatever it is that
Mhm.
God's called me to do. And I think that's such a trap.
Yeah.
And you really just kind of take that chapter and really just talk about being kingdom minded now, whatever you're
Yeah.
doing. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, being kingdom minded, which is essentially keeping the bigger picture in mind, that we are part of God's kingdom. And ultimately, during our little blip of time here on earth, we are to follow Him, bring glory to Him, and point to Him so that other souls can come to Christ and be saved through the Holy Spirit as well. But that's not always easy to do. We get distracted, I think is the big thing. We get distracted from that larger perspective, or, and I think this might be relatable to people listening, if you're not working in ministry, like as a full-time missionary or a pastor at a church. If you're a Christian, you're still working in ministry. I always tell
For
people. So
sure.
so I think what people might be able to relate to is that feeling of, that's not my role, to think about that as much. I'm personally walking with God, but I like, we make it something smaller than it needs to be. And so I would say to everyone listening, no matter where you're at right now, I don't even have to know where you're at right now. I don't have to know if you just had a baby and you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're a CEO of a company, or you're an entrepreneur, or like, I don't need to know any of that to know that if you're a believer, there's kingdom work for you to do right exactly where you're at.
Mm,
So that's the biggest thing for us to keep in mind, like to not be distracted, to stay kingdom minded. um, I'll try to talk about this. The example I use in the book is actually my brother, my 36-year-old brother, unfortunately passed last November,
mm,
and he's my favorite example of being kingdom minded. He brilliant guy, like graduated top of his class, went to med school. He had invitations from like Harvard Med and Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic. Like brilliant guy, great career ahead of him. After all of these other health ailments that he had had all throughout childhood, he was diagnosed with leukemia a few days after graduating med
Mm,
school. And he still, through the many years of, the decade of treatments and everything after that, up to the moment he went to be with Jesus, he remained kingdom minded through all of that, pointing to Jesus through every opportunity, never lost that perspective. And so if he can do it through all of that, I'm always like, well, I can do it. I can do it right here where I'm sitting. We can all do it, no matter what your circumstances are. You can keep your focus on having kingdom impact right where you are.
mm. No, I love that. Thanks for sharing your story of your brother. I'm
Yeah.
sorry for his loss. He's with Jesus in heaven right now, face to face, living
Yeah.
his in paradise. So, um, but but yeah, I know that was hard. But I love that story as well as giving out this letters, just encouraging people
Hmm.
even during his circumstances. So,
Yeah.
thanks for that. This is awesome. The Word at Work, guys. You guys have to get it. It's just a great book, practical book, and just really just kind of taking the kingdom to the workplace. And Miranda, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I want to just give you an opportunity. Where's the best place for them to go to maybe get more information about you? Because I know you also do coaching
Yeah.
and you have your book, and just talk to us about that.
Yeah, the best hub for everything is my website, mirandacarls.com, just first name, last name.com. Last name is with a C, Carls. Maybe we can link that in the show notes or somewhere. And so that'll link to all of the services I provide. It'll also give information on where to get the book. I do some blogging. I dabble in social media, but try not to spend a ton of time there. But you can also find me on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn as well.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks. We're going to put that in our show notes too on our YouTube channel, guys. So check that out. And Miranda, I'm going to ask you two questions just at the end, just a kind of a
Okay.
fun
Yeah.
couple of questions at the end. So maybe I'll still catch you off guard, but I think that you also lead worship. Is that right?
I do. Yes.
Okay, cool. What's like one of your favorite songs that you get to sing?
Yeah. Um, that would have been a hard question, but we just practiced last night, and one that we did I actually really love. So I love a lot of worship music. I love connecting with God through music. Christ be magnified is one that I'm really loving right now, just with the lyrics.
Mm,
Just Christ being magnified through us. So very much less of us, more of him. I love the bridge of that song. It talks about just like sticking with God through it all, and even if we're in the fire, we're going to rejoice because he's there with us. And so that's a great song, Christ be magnified. There's a version by Cody Carnes out, and probably a few others out as well.
awesome. Cool. Check that out. All right, last one. You also love reading.
I
So
do. Yep.
is there a book that you've read recently that you're like, this was really good?
Yeah. I do read. I love reading. There are so many. So I'm not saying that I don't like all the other books in the world when I call attention to a couple.
Right.
I'm going to say two, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
One that I recommend to people a lot, especially if they're interested in learning more about like logical defenses for the Christian faith or apologetics. Lisa Childers is a great resource for that in general, and I love her book, Another Gospel. It's been a while since I read it, but it's I think about it a lot, and I recommend it to people. A more recent read, Brett McCracken from the Gospel Coalition wrote a book called The Wisdom Pyramid. I read
Mm,
that over the summer. I don't have it next to me right now, but it's one of those books that you can tell it was like well loved and taken to the
mhm.
pool and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it's called The Wisdom Pyramid, and it's based on this concept, like the food pyramid. We have this consumption of our diet of information sources or sources of wisdom, and it prescribes like having the Bible as the foundation, and
Mm,
then
wow.
the church and edification from other believers. Nature, like God's creation, is in part of that. Other books, like books written by anyone other than God. And then like really tiny at the top, it's got like social media and all of that.
Gotcha.
So that is one that I read and loved. I'm going to have him on my podcast actually in a few weeks, and I just love the concept of that. I find myself telling everyone about that book, like Christian or
Yes.
non-Christian, like you have to read this and think about where you're getting your sources of wisdom from. So
Oh, I love that.
that's one that I've really enjoyed as well.
That is so cool. I'm gonna get those. I always like to ask them just for, even for my own
Yeah.
collection. I
Yep.
typically like order them right after the show, so definitely gonna
Yeah.
check that out. So,
Yep.
well, this is a wrap, Miranda. I thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been awesome, and God bless you.
Yeah. Thanks, Brett.